Picture this. You wake up and the sound is already there. Not a soft patter on the leaves, but a steady roar, like the sky has decided to empty itself all at once. You look out from the mouth of the shelter and everything is gray. The hills are gone behind a wall of water. The trail you were going to take is a stream now. And somewhere in your gut, you already know the truth. This isn't passing. This is going to last. For you, a week of rain is an inconvenience. You reschedule a hike. You order food instead of cooking. You watch the drops slide down the window and feel a little cozy about it. But for a human being 40,000 years ago, a week of endless rain was different. It was one of the most dangerous things the world could throw at them. No forecast. No idea if it would break tomorrow or keep going for a month. Just water, falling and falling, turning the entire landscape into a slow-moving threat. And yet they survived it. Over and over, across every continent people managed to reach, through wet seasons that lasted months and monsoons that came every single year. So how did they actually do it? How do you live through a week of rain? No roof that truly seals. No dry clothes waiting in a closet. No way to simply wait it out in comfort. The answer is stranger and more impressive than you'd think, and it starts with the thing that was trying to kill them first. It wasn't the water, it was the cold. Here's the part people get wrong. Rain rarely kills you by drowning. It kills you by stealing your heat. Water pulls warmth off the human body around 25 times faster than air does. That means a person soaked through in mild weather can slide toward hypothermia, while a dry person right next to them stays perfectly fine. You don't need a blizzard. You just need to be wet and cool and unable to get dry. A rainy stretch in the 50s, Fahrenheit, can drop a soaked human into real danger within a few hours. And most of the places our ancestors lived got at least that cool once the sun went down. So the very first problem of endless rain was never really about staying dry. It was about staying warm enough, long enough, to not cross that line. And that single problem shaped almost everything ancient humans built to survive the wet. Start with what they wore. The cartoon idea of a caveman in a ragged pelt slung over one shoulder is almost insulting to how good these people actually were. Tailored clothing made from animal hide was scraped, stretched, and worked through a long, multi-step process. Done well, it did two jobs at once. The outer surface shed water. The inner surface trapped a layer of warm air against the skin. That's the exact same principle behind the expensive rain gear people buy today, discovered tens of thousands of years earlier, with nothing but stone tools and patience. We can even see the tools that made it possible. Bone needles with tiny drilled eyes start showing up from around 40,000 years ago onward, in Siberia, in China, in Europe. And the craft they belong to runs back further still. Bone points and awls for working hide turn up at Sibudu Cave in South Africa around 61,000 years ago. A needle that fine has one purpose. It's for stitching close, tight seams, the kind that keep water from sneaking in where two pieces of hide meet. Somebody figured out that the weak point of a garment isn't the middle, it's the join, and they engineered around it. Some groups went a step further and worked animal fat into the leather, rubbing it in over days. It created an early kind of waterproofing that made the hide repel water even harder. None of that is instinct. It's knowledge, taught and inherited. Which animals gave the best hides? How to cure them? How to cut and sew them so the rain couldn't find a way through? Then there was shelter. The obvious move was to get under stone. And it's not a coincidence that so much of what we know about ancient life comes from caves and rock overhangs. A cave is a roof that water spent thousands of years carving, and no storm can defeat it. But a cave has a hidden problem, and it's a serious one during heavy rain. Water goes where it wants. Many caves and rock shelters sit at the base of slopes or near rivers, exactly where runoff collects, which meant the same rain you were hiding from could come flooding in after you. Archaeologists have dug through occupied cave floors and found thick layers of flood sediment sitting right on top of the living surface, the signature of water that surged in while people were living there. In some of those caves, the layer above the flood is empty. Nobody came back. The shelter that was supposed to save them became the thing they had to flee. So people learned to read the ground. They lived deeper in, on higher floors, away from the drip lines and the low spots where water pooled. Where there were no caves, they built, and they built smart. Steep roofs of thatched reeds and grasses, layered so each bundle overlapped the one below like shingles. Water ran down and off before it could soak through. In flood-prone country, some raised their floors on posts and let the water pass underneath. That same idea, lift the living space above where the water ends up, shows up on different continents, among people who never met. Which tells you it wasn't a fluke, it was the answer, and enough separate groups arrived at it independently that it might as well be a law of nature. But shelter and clothing only buy you time. There was one thing that mattered more than either, and during a long rain, it was under constant threat. The fire. We tend to imagine ancient people flicking a fire to life whenever they wanted one, but that's almost certainly wrong for most of human history. There's solid evidence of humans controlling fire deep in the past, at least 400,000 years ago at Kisum Cave in Israel, possibly close to 1 million years ago at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. But controlling a fire that already exists and creating one from cold, wet, nothing are two completely different skills. Making fire from scratch, in the damp, with primitive tools, is genuinely hard. So for a lot of people, the fire you had was the fire you protected, because you might not be able to make another one. Which is why, when the rain came, the fire came first. Before food, before comfort, you moved it deeper under cover. You shielded it with hides and brush, and fed it with the driest fuel you could find. Dead lower branches under an evergreen canopy stay dry when everything else is soaked. Split a wet log and the core is still dry inside. And birch bark holds an oil called betulin that burns even when it's damp. That makes it a near-magical fire starter in exactly the conditions when you need one most. And people took this seriously enough to carry insurance. When the frozen body of Ötzi turned up in the Alps, more than 5,000 years old, he had a full fire kit on him. Flint, a lump of iron pyrite for striking sparks, and tinder fungus, a woody mushroom that catches a spark and smolders inside itself for hours, basically a portable ember. Even that recently, losing your fire was dangerous enough that a man walking through the mountains carried dedicated gear to make sure it never happened. During a week of rain, someone's whole job might have been to sit by that fire and simply keep it alive. So now the fire is holding, your clothes are more or less working, and the water is staying out, and you cannot leave. For days. What do you actually do with all that time? You make things. And this is where the story quietly turns into something amazing. The floors of ancient caves are packed with evidence of work. Not survival scraps, production. Little scatters of stone chips, the debris of someone shaping a tool. They cluster in the exact spots where a person would sit near the firelight and work for hours. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found something close to a workshop, roughly 100,000 years old. People ground red ochre into pigment and mixed it in abalone shells using bone tools. That isn't desperation. That's a process, done on purpose, by someone who had the time and the focus to do it right. The kind of time a long rain hands you, whether you want it or not. And then there's rope. It sounds boring until you realize how much of everything depends on it. Cord and string let you bind a stone point to a shaft, lash a shelter together, set a snare, carry a load. At Abri du Marais in France, researchers found a fragment of twisted plant fiber cord left by Neanderthals, on the order of 50,000 years old, some of the oldest direct evidence of string anywhere. And at Hohlfels Cave in Germany, there's a tool carved from mammoth ivory, around 40,000 years old, holes and spiral grooves cut into it, for twisting fibers into rope. Making rope is slow, repetitive, patient work. It is, in other words, the perfect thing to do when you're stuck inside and can't go anywhere. An enormous amount of human technology runs on string, and string was very likely invented by people waiting out the weather. They didn't stop at tools, either. They made their shelters into homes. At Sibudu Cave, also in South Africa, archaeologists found bedding from 77,000 years ago. Actual bedding. Layers of rushes and sedges arranged as sleeping mats. The top layer was made from a plant, sometimes called Cape laurel, that naturally repels insects. They even burned off the old bedding now and then to clean out the pests and laid down fresh. 77,000 years ago, people were doing pest control. They weren't just surviving the rain, they were living well through it. And then comes the part almost nobody expects. Because after the tools and the rope and the bedding, there's the art. Deep inside caves across the world, ancient people painted. Chauvet Cave in France holds images roughly 36,000 years old. Lions and horses and rhinos, drawn with such command of anatomy and movement that they still stop people in their tracks. On the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia, a painting of a wild pig has been dated to at least 45,000 years, among the oldest known figurative art on Earth. And here's the detail that changes everything. These paintings usually aren't near the entrance, where you'd shelter from a storm. They're deep, far back through narrow passages, in chambers you have to crawl to reach. Someone carried a little fat-burning lamp into total darkness and made art where no daylight has ever fallen. Nobody does that when the sun is out and the hunting is good. You do that when you can't go outside, when the rain has been falling for days, when every tool is already sharpened and there is nothing left to do but go deeper into the dark and create something. We can't prove cave art was a rainy day habit, but the greatest creative explosion in human prehistory happened in exactly the kind of places where people were most likely to be trapped inside, for long stretches. The logic is hard to ignore, and it may go bigger than art. It may reach all the way to culture itself. Think about what happens when a group of people is packed into one dry space for days with nowhere to go. They talk. In 2014, the anthropologist Polly Wiesner studied conversation among the Jew/Huansi people of the Kalahari and found something striking. In daylight, talk was practical, about resources, land, and complaints. But at night, around the fire, more than 80% of it shifted to stories, songs, and the imagination. Firelight changed what people spoke about, and a lot of what got passed around that fire wasn't idle. It was survival. Which plants are safe? Where the water hides in the dry season? How to read an animal's track? Knowledge moving from one mind to the next through nothing but words. Some of that talk became stories that lasted almost beyond belief. Certain Australian Aboriginal oral traditions describe coastlines drowning under rising seas, events that geologists can date to roughly 7,000 years ago. Those stories were carried across 7,000 years by people telling them to each other, night after night. Memory like that doesn't form unless a group spends enormous amounts of time together, retelling, reinforcing, remembering. Rainy days weren't dead time. They were transmission time, the hours when a whole culture handed itself down to the next generation. And here's the twist at the end of it all. Rain wasn't only the enemy. Sometimes it was the best thing that could happen. When a downpour finally stops, the soft, wet ground holds tracks like a printed page, clear and fresh, showing exactly what walked past and when. Rain filled natural rock basins with clean drinking water, and some of those basins were deliberately carved deeper to hold more. Rain made tubers easier to dig, brought mushrooms up overnight, and sent termites swarming to the surface, a burst of protein you could gather by hand. The rain that trapped you was also, on the other side of it, restocking the entire world. So how did ancient humans survive a week of endless rain? They stayed warm in clothing, better engineered than we give them credit for. They sheltered under stone and steep thatch and lifted their homes above the flood. They guarded the fire like the living thing it was. And then, trapped inside with nothing but time, they did the most human thing imaginable. They made needles and rope and bedding. They painted animals in the dark. They told the stories that would outlive them by thousands of years. The rain didn't stop them. It sat them down. It put a wall of water between them and the world. And it gave them the one thing survival almost never allows: time to think. And what they made in that time, waiting for the sky to clear. It's a very large part of the reason we're still here, to watch the rain and feel cozy.